The backyard glowed under warm Idaho sunlight, string lights swaying, barbecue smoke curling into the air, guests laughing like they'd stepped into a magazine photo spread. From the outside, the scene was perfect, but Mara Collins knew better. Perfection had always been her family's favorite lie. She stood near the patio table, a paper plate in one hand and a knife in the other, staring at the graduation cake pushed to the far corner. White frosting, blue lettering that read "Congrats, Mara," now smudged where soda cans had bumped against it. No one bothered to straighten it. No one even seemed to remember it was hers. Her mother, Linda, floated around like a polished hostess, showering attention on everyone but her. Her sister, Avery, sat perched at the center of the crowd in a floral dress, glowing under the attention. Her 10-year-old son, Liam, sat beside her, soaking in the praise that had never once been directed at Mara. "Tell us about the Florida trip," someone called out. Avery laughed, flipping her hair. "Oh, it was amazing. Mom insisted we stay an extra week." Mara forced a polite smile. Not one person had asked about her degree. Not one person asked how Seattle was. Her achievements sat on that table exactly the way she'd lived her entire life, visible but ignored, acknowledged but unwanted. A breeze rippled through the backyard, making the fairy lights shimmer. For one fragile moment, Mara allowed herself hope. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe anyone would see her. Then Liam sprinted toward the cake, mischief glinting in his eyes. "Aunt Mara," he shouted. "Mom says you only got your degree so you could brag." Laughter erupted, sharp, ugly, unrestrained. Linda didn't stop him. Avery hid her smirk behind a wine glass. Before Mara could speak, Liam shoved the cake off the table. Time slowed. The porcelain plate shattered against the patio. Frosting splattered across Mara's shoes like a mockery of celebration. The crowd gasped, then laughed again. Louder this time. Mara froze, the knife still in her hand. Her mother's voice cut through the noise, light and amused. "Oh, come on, Mara. Don't be so sensitive." That was the moment something in her chest cracked, not loudly, but in a way she knew she would never repair. Mara set the knife down, untied the apron around her waist, and walked out. Each step across the patio boards felt like shedding a layer of a life she no longer wanted. Their laughter followed her into the dusk. She didn't cry. She didn't look back. She simply walked away, knowing that whatever happened next, there was no going back to who she had been before tonight. As Mara walked to her car that night, the noise of the party dimming behind her, a quiet truth settled over her like a cold, familiar blanket. This wasn't new. What happened with the cake wasn't an accident or a moment of childish cruelty. It was the purest reflection of her family's dynamic, one they'd rehearsed for years, her entire life. Mara had been the invisible daughter. Growing up, Avery shined in every room she entered. The golden child, who seemed to glow without trying. She danced in recitals with sparkly costumes. Mara sat in folding chairs, clapping. Avery got spontaneous family trips to theme parks. Mara got told, "We'll take you next time." Avery's school projects were framed and posted online. Mara's A+ essays sat in dusty drawers. Whenever Mara asked for attention, her mother always had the same response: "Sweetheart, Avery just needs us more right now. You're the strong one." Strong, responsible, independent. Words that sounded like praise but felt like chains. When Mara left for college in Seattle, her mother hadn't cried. She had barely hugged her. Instead, she'd pulled Mara aside the night before departure and handed her a manila folder. "Your father and I need help co-signing Avery's car loan," Linda had said, as if discussing a grocery list. "She's younger. She can't do it alone. You understand, right? You've always been our responsible one." At 19, Mara thought being needed meant being loved. She signed without hesitation. Years later, that signature grew into 2 auto payments withdrawn from her account every month, Avery's SUV and her parents' mortgage. What began as a temporary favor became an unending obligation. When Mara helped, they called her dependable. When Avery needed something, they called it a necessity. When Mara asked for nothing, they told her she should be proud of her strength. But when Mara really succeeded, the silence was deafening. During grad school, she won a statewide award for her research project. Her classmates took photos, her professors hugged her, congratulated her, asked about her future plans. Mara sent a picture to the family group chat. Her mother replied 1 hour later, "Avery needs help with Liam's school fees. Can you send $250 today?" No congratulations, no acknowledgement of her achievement. Just another extraction masked as family loyalty. Mara should have seen the truth back then. But hope is stubborn. It clings even when logic tells you to let go. At every family gathering, she stood slightly outside the circle, close enough to be useful, never close enough to belong. She became the photographer, the dishwasher, the errand runner, the person who filled the empty spaces so others could shine. Even the graduation party that night had followed the same script. Avery at the center of attention, Linda orchestrating smiles, and Mara hovering at the perimeter, waiting for someone to treat her as more than a shadow. But the cake hitting the patio floor didn't just splatter frosting, it splattered every illusion Mara had clung to. She wasn't the strong one. She wasn't the responsible one. She wasn't the backbone of the family. She was the one they used, ignored, laughed at, and dismissed without consequence. And for the first time, Mara realized being the strong one doesn't matter in a family that only values your silence. The world she'd tiptoed around her whole life had finally shown its teeth, and she was done pretending it didn't bite. The drive from Idaho back to Seattle should have felt familiar, almost comforting. Long stretches of quiet highway, pine trees blurring past, wind brushing against the car windows. But that night, the silence inside Mara's car felt razor sharp. The laughter from the party replayed in her head like a loop she couldn't turn off. Liam's taunting voice, Avery's hidden smirk, her mother's bright, dismissive "don't be so sensitive." Each memory pricked her like a needle. By the third hour of driving, something inside her chest began to shift, not cracking this time, but settling with a strange and absolute clarity. She wasn't hurt anymore, not shocked, not confused, just done. When she pulled into her Seattle apartment past midnight, rain streaked the windows like the sky itself was trying to wash the night away. Mara closed the door behind her, dropped her keys on the counter, and sank onto the couch. The room was still, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft patter of rain. Her phone buzzed, a message from her mother. For one foolish second, one soft, instinctive heartbeat, Mara hoped it might be an apology. That maybe someone had realized what had happened. That maybe the silence she left behind had jolted them awake. She opened the message. "We've chosen to sever all contact. Stay away forever." A moment later, a tiny red heart popped up beside it. Avery had liked the message. Mara didn't sob. She didn't break down. She didn't feel the familiar tightening grip of guilt. She just stared at the screen, letting the words settle like dust. Sever all contact. Stay away forever. The irony was almost laughable. They had thrown her out of a place she'd never truly been allowed into. They didn't cut her off. They simply confirmed what she had suspected her whole life. She was never part of them to begin with. When her breath steadied, she opened her laptop. The blue light illuminated her face as the spreadsheet she'd avoided for months blinked back at her. 2 lines, 2 debts, 2 chains, parents' mortgage for $100 monthly, Avery's SUV $640 monthly, automatically withdrawn, automatically expected, automatically hers to bear. She scrolled through old texts from her mother. Each one tightened the knot in her stomach. "Just help us out for now. You're responsible, honey. Avery has enough on her plate. We'll take over the payments next month." Next month never came. The weight she'd carried for years settled in her chest like a stone, but this time, it didn't crush her. It steadied her. Mara opened a new message. Her fingers slow but resolute as she typed, "Removing my name from every loan tomorrow." No explanation. No apology. No emotion. She pressed send. The phone chimed once and fell silent. For the first time in her life, silence didn't mean abandonment. It meant freedom. Beginning to breathe, morning crept into Mara's apartment like a pale whisper. Gray skies, muted light, the kind of quiet that made everything feel sharper. She hadn't slept, but she didn't feel tired. She felt awake, as if her mind had finally stepped out of a fog she hadn't realized she'd been living in. Bym. Her phone was vibrating nonstop. Calls, voicemails, messages. Mom, Dad, Avery, even unfamiliar Boise numbers she recognized as relatives. Notifications stacked like falling dominoes, but not one message said, "We're sorry." Instead, "You've gone too far. Do you know what you're doing to us? After everything we've done for you, you're destroying this family." Every line was a familiar melody of guilt, one Mara had danced to for years. But today, she didn't move. She sat at her small dining table, opened her laptop, and pulled up the spreadsheet again. The numbers stared back accusingly, but for the first time, they didn't feel like chains, they felt like evidence. 3 years of payments withdrawn from her account. 3 years of her life siphoned away in the name of family. Avery's SUV, her parents' mortgage, plus all the extras she hadn't tracked: school fees for Liam, vacation costs, credit card balances her mom had temporarily paid using Mara's account. Back then, she thought sacrifice meant love. Now, she saw it for what it was, a leash disguised as gratitude. Her breathing steadied. She grabbed her folder: leases, pay stubs, emails, text messages, and left for the downtown Seattle branch of Green First Bank. The office of Mr. Diaz was quiet, painted in soft blues with a single fern in the corner. He was in his 50s, with a calmness that settled the air. "Miss Collins," he said as she sat down, "I've reviewed your documents. I believe I understand what's happening." Mara folded her hands in her lap. "I co-signed to loans for my family. They've never paid them. I want out." Mr. Diaz nodded gently, as if he'd heard this story too many times. "You're not the first person to be taken advantage of under the word family." He slid a stack of legal paperwork toward her. "If you can prove you have no ownership of their home or the vehicle, we can begin the liability release process and freeze their joint access." Mara handed him her folder-printed texts from her mother saying, "The house is ours. You just help sign." He reviewed everything, then looked up. "This is all we need. We'll proceed immediately." The pen in her hand felt heavier than it should. Each signature she wrote felt like cutting another string one thread at a time. When Mr. Diaz stamped the final page, the sound echoed through the quiet room. "Mara," he said softly, "you did the right thing. Sometimes the only way to teach others to respect you is to stop letting them use you." Walking out into the cold Seattle air, Mara felt something shift inside her. Not guilt, not fear, relief. For the first time, she wasn't holding them together. She was letting herself go free. When Mara stepped out of Green First Bank, the Seattle wind cut against her cheeks, cold, sharp, almost cleansing. She inhaled deeply, letting the weight of the stamped documents settle into her bones. For the first time in years, she wasn't financially tethered to her family. They could no longer reach into her account, her future, her peace. But freedom had a price, and her family realized it before she even reached home. Her phone buzzed relentlessly all afternoon: calls, texts, and voicemails piling up faster than she could swipe them away. "Mom, how could you do this? Your father is panicking." "Avery, my car is about to be repossessed. Fix this." "Dad, your mother is crying. Don't be selfish." The familiar chorus of blame, all playing their assigned roles. But Mara didn't respond. She didn't owe them explanations anymore. When she finally returned to her apartment, sunset dripping gold across the skyline, she set her phone face down on the counter and brewed herself a cup of tea. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline. The kind that comes after stepping off a cliff and realizing halfway down that maybe, just maybe, you'll survive the fall. She was stirring her tea when the first pounding hit her door. Sharp, angry, relentless. Mara froze. She knew that knock. It was the one her mother used whenever she wanted control. Without conversation, she checked the video intercom. Her mother and Avery stood outside her apartment building hallway, faces tight, eyes wild, the look of people whose world had finally collided with consequences. "Mara Collins," her mother shouted, "open this door right now. We need to talk." Avery's voice cracked with panic. "You ruined everything. The bank froze our accounts. My car, my life is falling apart because of you." Mara didn't move. She didn't reach for the door. Instead, she reached for her phone calmly, deliberately opening the 911 app. "Seattle Police Department," the dispatcher answered. "What's your emergency?" "My mother and sister are outside my apartment," Mara said quietly. "They're yelling, refusing to leave, and trying to force a confrontation." "I'd like to report trespassing," the dispatcher asked. "Do you know these individuals?" "Yes," Mara whispered. "But today, they're just people ignoring my boundary." Outside, Avery slammed her palm against the door. "You think you're strong now? You think cutting us off makes you powerful? You're heartless." Mara closed her eyes, letting the words pass through her like wind through an open window. They didn't stick the way they used to. Within 10 minutes, flashing blue and red lights painted the hallway. 2 officers approached Mara's mother and sister, their posture calm but firm. "Ma'am," one officer said to Linda, "this is private property. If she asked you to leave, you must leave. She's my daughter." her mother snapped. The officer shook his head. Not a valid reason to trespass. Avery's frustration broke into tears. You're destroying this family. Mara finally spoke through the intercom. Her voice low, steady. If you act like intruders, then family or not, you'll be treated like intruders. The officers escorted them out, their angry footsteps echoing down the stairwell until silence settled again. Mara stood alone in her apartment, breath trembling not from fear, but from release. She saved the audio recording under one word: boundaries, a beginning written not in anger, but in self-respect. The police lights had barely disappeared from the street when the next wave hit. This time, it wasn't pounding on the door. It was something far quieter and far more dangerous. A notification lit up Mara's phone. Facebook. Linda Collins posted in Idaho family and friends. Her stomach tightened not with fear, but with recognition. Her mother didn't need fists to hurt her. She used narratives. Mara clicked the post. Big block letters screamed across the screen. Sometimes the child you trust most betrays you worst. My daughter Mara stole from us and ruined our credit. Some people never learn gratitude. Below it, a flood of comments. So ungrateful. Poor Linda. She did everything for that girl. She used her parents' money to buy that Seattle apartment. What a disappointment. Mara felt the familiar sting sharp, visceral, but it faded faster than she expected. Maybe because she already knew who they were. Maybe because the truth no longer needed their approval. She closed the app. No explanations. No long-winded defenses. Just a breath. A choice. Instead, she opened a new email to her coworkers. Subject: clarification, personal matter. Hi team, if you happen to see rumors online, please ignore them. Some people fight boundaries with lies. I'm fine and appreciate your professionalism and privacy. Mara. Short, measured, powerful. She hit send. And suddenly the noise outside felt distant, like thunder rolling across a valley she no longer lived in. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived at her office. Green First Bank. Inside was the official document. This letter confirms that Miss Mara Collins has been fully released from all liabilities concerning the joint mortgage and vehicle loan under the names of Linda and Avery Collins. The gold embossed seal shimmered as she ran her thumb across it. It was real. It was done. Their financial hold on her was over. That evening, Mara received one more message. Private number. Angry tone. You'll pay for this. You think you've won? Just wait. She stared at the message, then set her phone down. Winning wasn't the point. Freedom was. Outside her window, the Seattle skyline glowed clean, sharp, full of second chances. For the first time in years, Mara felt the space around her expand instead of shrink. She didn't need a family that only thrived when she was small. She was finally becoming the version of herself they feared most, a woman who no longer needed them. The smear campaign didn't end with one Facebook post. It evolved. Within 24 hours, Mara's name began popping up in places she hadn't visited in years: old high school groups, neighborhood threads, distant relatives' timelines, all carrying the same script, the same wounded mother narrative her mom had perfected long ago. Linda had always cared more about appearances than truth, and now, stripped of financial support, she was desperate to reclaim power the only way she knew how. Public sympathy. One screenshot read, "My daughter abandoned us during medical hardship. She froze our accounts without warning." Another, "We raised Mara better than this." Success clearly made her heartless, and the comments poured in. "She always seemed cold, per Avery. How is she supposed to raise Liam now? I heard Mara hasn't visited her parents in years. So selfish." People who hadn't spoken to her since she was 12 now typed paragraphs about her character as though they'd lived in her skin. Several even tagged her workplace, hoping to stir trouble. But if her family expected Mara to panic, to defend herself, to crumble under the weight of their accusations, they underestimated the woman they had built through neglect. Instead of spiraling, she observed, quiet, detached, clear-headed. For the first time, she saw plainly how manufactured their narrative had always been. It wasn't Mara they hated, it was losing control over her. Her silence wasn't guilt. It was boundaries, and boundaries to them felt like betrayal. Mara drafted a message to her HR department before any rumors could spread internally. A personal family matter has escalated online. False claims may circulate. I'm safe, stable, and have taken all legal steps to protect myself. Her manager replied within minutes. We trust you. Please let us know if you need any support. no interrogation, no suspicion, just respect. The contrast to her family was jarring, almost painful in its simplicity. That evening, Mara deleted every family member from her social media accounts. Not blocked, removed. Clean cuts. No lingering TIs for people to tug at. She sat by her window, watching rain slip down the glass, Seattle glowing soft and silver outside. She expected to feel guilt, maybe sorrow. Instead, she felt something startling. Light.as though she had spent years carrying a weight she never noticed until it was gone. Her phone buzzed again, new notifications. More posts. More accusations. Mara turned the phone face down on the table. Let them scream into the digital void. Let them twist the story for people who never mattered in her life. Let them try to punish her with a spotlight she no longer feared. Her truth didn't live online. Her freedom didn't depend on public opinion. And her worth had never belonged to people who only valued her as long as she stayed small. This time, the smear campaign didn't trap her. It revealed just how far she'd risen beyond their reach. 3 days after the smear campaign reached its peak, Mara's apartment mailbox held a single thick envelope, the kind that carried either disaster or deliverance. The return address made her pulse quicken. Green First Bank Legal and Compliance Division. She brought it inside, sat at her kitchen counter, and slid a finger under the seal. Inside, crisp papers gleamed beneath the afternoon light. This letter confirms that Miss Mara Collins has been fully released from all liabilities concerning the joint mortgage and vehicle loan under the names of Linda and Avery Collins. A gold embossed seal sat at the bottom like a quiet crown. Mara stared at it for a long moment, her breath softening in her chest. This wasn't just paperwork. It was proof. Proof that she wasn't crazy. Proof that she hadn't imagined the exploitation. Proof that she had finally severed the financial chains her family had wrapped around her since she was 19. By evening, the Facebook smear posts slowly began disappearing. First, Avery deleted her comments. Then, Mara's mother quietly removed the entire thread. Whether the bank contacted them, or someone told them the truth, or the mounting embarrassment finally broke through the delusion, it didn't matter. The damage to Mara's reputation wasn't real. The damage to their narrative was. A final message buzzed in from an unknown number. You'll pay for this. You think you've won? Just wait. Mara read it once, then set her phone down without replying. Winning was never the point. Punishment wasn't the point either. Freedom was. Peace was. Clarity was. She walked to her window. Outside, the Seattle skyline stretched beneath the evening sky, clean, sharp, shimmering like a future she finally believed she deserved. The air was cold and smelled faintly of rain, but it felt like oxygen. After years of breathing through fog, everything her family had used to bind her guilt, obligation, financial entanglement, public humiliation had collapsed in the span of a week, not because Mara fought harder than them, but because she finally stepped out of the arena. Their chaos couldn't reach her unless she kept showing up to receive it. She didn't, and for the first time in her life, Mara understood something liberating. Sometimes the real turnaround isn't when they fall apart. It's when you stop falling with them. In the weeks that followed, the storm around Mara finally began to quiet. Her phone stopped lighting up with unknown numbers. The constant buzzing of notifications faded into silence. And for the first time, silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like space. Space to breathe. Space to grow. Space to figure out who she was without the weight of her family pressing on her spine. Mara threw herself into her work at Green Pulse Tech. Without the emotional drain of family chaos, she felt sharper, quicker, more present. Projects she once struggled to focus on now flowed with ease. She arrived early, stayed late not because she felt she had to prove herself, but because her mind was finally hers again. Her coworkers noticed. During a team meeting, Lydia, the CEO, paused mid-discussion and smiled softly at Mara. You lead with steadiness, she said. People trust that. It was the first time anyone had said those words to Mara without turning them into a demand. Her chest warmed with something like recognition. This was the kind of validation she had chased from her family for years, only to find it here, where she didn't have to bleed to earn it. Outside of work, her life slowly blossomed into something gentle and wholly her own. She started waking up early for yoga, at sunrise, letting her body stretch into spaces she'd never allowed herself to inhabit. In the evenings, she experimented with cooking, not the rushed, survival meals she'd eaten in the past, but dishes that filled her apartment with rich aromas. Tomato basil soup, honey, garlic, salmon, lavender tea. She decorated her apartment with small touches, framed art prints, soft linens, a cactus on the windowsill that her friend Marcus joked looked like him, quiet but prickly. And then one day, Mr. Diaz, the bank officer who had helped free her, sent her an unexpected email. Attached was a photo of her liability release document, framed and hanging in the bank's compliance office. "We use your case as an example of financial boundary protection," his message read. "Thank you for standing up for yourself." Mara stared at the photo, stunned. Something inside her softened. For years, she had felt like a burden, the difficult daughter, the ungrateful sibling. But here she was, becoming an example of strength, of clarity, of survival. Her past hadn't broken her. It had built her life filled with small joys now, Elena bringing flowers after a long day, Marcus teasing her about her emotionally needy cactus, warm cups of coffee sipped by her window overlooking Lake Union. These were not big, dramatic victories. They were better. They were hers. One morning, as sunlight spilled across her floor and Seattle's skyline shimmered in the distance, Mara realized she'd stopped waiting for her family to apologize. She no longer needed it. Rebuilding her life didn't mean putting the old pieces back together. It meant carving a new shape, one that finally fit her. A full year slipped quietly into the past, carrying with it the echoes of shouting, slammed doors, and accusations that once shook Mara's bones. Seattle had become her sanctuary, a place where she didn't walk on eggshells, didn't brace for the next demand, didn't shrink herself to keep the peace. One evening, as she returned home from work with a bag of groceries in her arms, her phone buzzed with a single notification, a message from a number she hadn't saved. "Avery, I'm sorry for everything." Just 6 words. No excuses, no bargaining, no manipulation. Mara stared at the screen, letting the words settle. In another life, a past version of herself, she would have cried, rushed to reply, clung to the hope of reconciliation. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She set the phone down without answering, not out of anger, out of peace. Forgiveness didn't require reopening the door. Sometimes forgiveness was simply laying down the burden and walking away from it forever. That night, Mara made pasta in her small kitchen, humming softly as steam clouded the window. When she sat down to eat, she glanced toward the framed liability release document on her wall. Next to it hung a photo of her team at Green Pulse Tech, smiling around her after she earned her promotion. 2 sides of her journey, what she had escaped, what she had built. She ate slowly, savoring the warmth spreading through her chest, not pride, not triumph, but contentment. A life once drained by obligation, now filled with gentle routines, real friendships, and choices that belonged solely to her. Later, she stepped onto her balcony overlooking Lake Union. The water shimmered under the fading orange sky, rippling softly, as if bowing to the end of a long story. Mara breathed deeply, letting the cool air settle inside her. She had survived. She had rebuilt. She had risen. Not because someone saved her, but because she finally saved herself, and that was the final resolution she had spent her whole life waiting for. Message moral for the audience: see if you've ever been the strong one, the responsible one, the one everyone relies on, but no one protects. This story is for you. Remember, setting boundaries is not betrayal, walking away is not weakness, and the family you lose by choosing yourself was never your family to begin with. You deserve peace. You deserve respect. You deserve a life that feels like yours, and it's never too late to start building it.